Good morning and welcome, everyone. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Nora Fever, and I'm the Director of Programs and Innovation with the Gross Moore Institute for Sustainable Tourism, or GMIST. It's great to see so many people joining us this morning, and it's great to see participants from all over Atlantic Canada, and I believe we have some from Ontario joining us as well. I really hope you enjoy today's session. It's entitled Sponsorship, Old Ways Won't Open New Doors. And GMIST is really excited to be working with Festivals and Events Ontario to offer 2 of these festival and events webinars this fall. You're not going to hear too much from me because we have lots to learn this morning from our guest speakers. So I'm going to pass the screen right over to Debbie Mann, who is the Business Development Manager with Festivals and Events Ontario, and she's going to facilitate today's session. So Debbie, over to you.
Thanks, Nora, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm very excited to be here and working with Brad and Nora on this presentation. So like Nora said, my name's Debbie Mann. I'm with Festivals and Events Ontario, and I have done something for the last couple of years called Tuesday Talks with Theo. And Nora asked me if I would support her and GMIST to offer these courses or these sessions for Newfoundland and the East Coast. So here we are. Brad from Sponsor Circle is going to be our speaker today. I'm going to be the moderator. And Brad's been with Festivals and Events Ontario, working with us for a few years now. So we're very familiar with him and the quality of product that he brings to the table and his knowledge on sponsorship. So Brad, why don't you take it now, and we'll get questions. Oh, just before Brad, you take over. As Brad is doing his presentation, please feel free to interrupt, put your hand up, unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you don't want to do that, just type it into the chat room. I will read it to Brad, or Brad can get it while he's doing that. He'll probably be on the presentation, so I'll ask him the questions. Otherwise, we're just going to move forward. And then after this particular session, we are going to send you a survey to see how you like this. So we'll remind you of all of that later. So Brad, over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself? And
Perfect. Thanks so much, Debbie. It's fantastic to be invited. Thank you to Nora and Debbie for the invitation to speak to you today. Great to see a few faces and names that I recognize here. So I know there'll be some engaging conversation. As Debbie was saying, I've got a presentation that I'm going to walk you through, but feel free at any time to make this conversational. Happy to jump in and do some tangents or build on different elements of the presentation and the conversation here. What I'm working with you today is on the old ways of sponsorship aren't going to open new doors. So it's how do we develop that and move forward and have a strategy that will be more effective for you and be more mindful of your time and make sure that you're much more focused moving forward. So Jay, if you just want to move to the next slide. So I'm with Sponsor Circle. We're a platform that really tries to cut through all the clutter that exists in sponsorship and brand marketing. So we have recognized that it's a really fragmented industry. There's a lot of different players. There's a lot of different activity going on it. So we have AI that we've built into our platform that helps brands find the right audiences they're looking for through festivals, events, sports teams, etc. And on your end, when you're looking for sponsors and you're trying to prospect, finding out who are the people that are in market and where do you need to start and where are their investments. Our average estimate is that it takes about 4 to 5 hours for you to find one contact at one organization. We help you find that faster and keep you focused. And I always love to start with this quote. It's Ricardo Four, if you've never come across him. He's ex-head of global sponsorship for Coca-Cola. Now he's an advisor in the space. But sponsorships are shortcuts to better business results. Consumers gaining consumer love and more meaningful brands. You can gain that in other ways, but it becomes much more expensive and takes a longer time. Anybody knows that it takes a long time for a brand, particularly a new brand, to build trust with consumers. And sponsorship allows the brands to talk to people when they are engaged in something they enjoy. That really creates that cohesion of the brand talking to people at a moment that they're receptive to the conversation and can really further that conversation faster. Next slide, Jay. And as part of that, brands use sponsorship to increase their likability. So an effective sponsorship is going to add to an experience. It's going to build on that engagement that's happening there and makes your event much more enjoyable, but also creates that synergy between the brand and the activity that they're bringing to the table. And the next day. And I always love to start with these elements. If you've never come across this before, please look up the Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study. Normal Riley and his team have been running this now for 14, 15 years. They're currently taking research that you can contribute to about what's going on in the sponsorship industry, being able to measure against where brands are sitting, where agencies are sitting, and where organizations are sitting. It's free to download. Norm does a number of talks on it, detailing the results every year. So I definitely encourage you to look that up and participate in it. But this gives you an overview of the $2 billion that are being spent annually in Canada for sponsorship. How much of that is being attributed annually directly to sponsorship? So, of their marketing budget. So out of the $10 billion that's being spent in marketing in Canada, $2 billion is being spent in sponsorship. It's a quarter of the spend. So that kind of gets you a good placement of where you are when you're talking to people about where do you sit against radio, where do you sit against TV, out of home. So it's a big, big market. Now in 2020, you'll see a jump. And sponsorship actually did well through COVID, which is counter to a lot of people's thinking. But when you look at where the industry was as a whole, transit ads pretty much went to zero. Billboard and out of home became pretty select. Downtown cores, people weren't traveling through the downtown, and it was really hard for people to reach anybody through there, as well as traditional radio saw a big hit because people weren't in their cars in the same way. But sponsorship did hold up because it still had that engagement. The next slide, Jay. So this is also, a really good piece of that landscape study. It's knowing where you sit within that $2 billion. Professional sport has, for the longest time, always taken the lion's share of that budget. And through 2020, it makes sense that they were able to even take a larger share because they were operating even without fans. There was still sport going on and a whole number of activities engaged in that. But if you take professional sport and amateur sport, that's almost 3/4 of that $2 billion that's being dedicated to those two entities. So the festival line is the yellow line. And over the last 15 years, that's ranged between 8 and 24% of marketing budgets in sponsorship. So it has been declining over the last number of years. So if you take all of you in the call here today, you're all competing for roughly $160 million in budget across the country. So that gives you a good sense of the capacity that is out there and where you can sit your budgets. Next slide, Jay. So this is always a challenging one. The old approach for sponsorship, and you'll see it, and I hear it from a number of organizations that we work with, that the EDs or the board, they want a gold, silver, bronze. They want a package that they're comfortable with, that they've seen all the time, and certainly in the 80s and 90s worked effectively. But that isn't the case now. So we need to go out with the old and start bringing in some of the new. And we've got the display of an event T-shirt there where it's logo soup. And there's no differentiation for any of those brands there. You passing by, you really have to concentrate to find who's on there and what's the ROI they're really getting of being on that T-shirt. I had somebody bring it up a few years ago that Nobody's going to pay for a 30-second commercial and then only put their logo on for that full 30 seconds. There needs to be more context to it. You need to provide more engagement to actually create that effective sponsorship relationship. So that's what I'm going to be going through over the next few slides, is kind of walking through a different approach, and one that we recommend with quite a number of our partners. So Jay, if you can go to the next slide. So our 5 elements that we focus on are borrowing equity, storytelling, engaging stakeholders, seeing proof, and then achieving your results. And then on to the next slide, Jay. So equity can come in a variety of different forms, but it's being able to define what is unique within your event, your organization, that a brand's going to want. The effectiveness of a sponsorship is that a brand is looking for some legitimacy that they don't necessarily have in the market, or they're trying to reinforce in the market. So the engagement for years with Shoppers Drug Mart and the Weekend End Breast Cancer absolutely made sense. They've got an event that really speaks to women, and then knowing that quite a number of their consumers are women, and the connection between breast cancer and health really makes sense. So for years that really kind of connected those two. And if you go to the next slide, Jay. And then there's also looking at affiliation with different communities. So understanding what that connection can be. Being everything to everyone isn't gonna speak to the sponsor. So being able to know what your audience element is gonna create that connection. So whether it's you've got a whole roster of newcomers coming in, there are sponsors who are looking to speak to that audience because they've got a business driver for that. Thanks, Jay. And then comes storytelling. Storytelling is a really big one. It's finding what the sponsor is actually trying to speak to. Tim Hortons' engagement in hockey isn't actually about hockey. It's all around being Canadian and all those connections to being Canadian and the warm and fuzzies that brings. So it creates much more of a connection with the audience than just being, at the Timbits hockey on a Saturday. Next slide, Jay. And the same thing with Red Bull. Everybody thinks that it's all about extreme sports because they've got all of these elements where it's, skateboarding, skydiving, crazy planes, but it's about energy release and the whole element of what they're promoting and keeping people active. So it's trying to find what's the story that you're building that you can actually bring to partners. So we work with Parkinson's Canada and help them redevelop some of their sponsorship strategy. And one of the things that we really latched onto was every single person who touched Parkinson's Canada as an organization was going through a major life change. And once we defined the fact that that was the starting point, then what were the elements of that major life change? So they were going to have to revisit their finances. They needed to look at their insurance. They needed to look at their housing situation. Maybe they needed to look at their car and where that was going, or the fact that they recognized that their physical ability was diminishing. And then they were going, I've got my bucket list of activities that I want to do, and I need to do that before I physically can't do it anymore. So that helped shape the story going out to partners. Here's why you should be involved with us, because we've got this connection to the audience that was beyond the mission of the organization. So it takes some time to build that out, but it's really important and becomes the sort of starting point with quite a number of partners moving forward. And then the next slide. And then engaging stakeholders is you're building connection with customers. That's the main goal of most sponsors, is they want to create that connection. So Tide Loads of Hope, they've been running this for years. They go into communities that have been hit with hurricane, flood, tornado, and they've got tractor trailers of washing machines. And they just show up and you can bring your laundry there and get it done there. And that creates an instant connection between the brand and what's going on, and that the fact that the brand cares for you. So those kind of activities really stand out. And you can go to the next slide, Jay. And then additionally, you got to find out who are the other stakeholders that they're looking to connect with. It could be suppliers. It could be different government relations people. And getting an understanding of who they need to connect with is also going to help shape. Maybe you've got a huge event that you're running, but one element is going to be important to them because you're making a connection to somebody important to them. The example I have for that was working with the Toronto Region Board of Trade. They had a partner that they had been working with for some time who was struggling with newcomers coming to Canada, getting them approved for PR in order to continue working with them. And it was really affecting their HR and their employee base. The Toronto Region Board of Trade had the opportunity to have the Minister of Immigration come and do a presentation for one breakfast. That sponsor paid the whole sponsorship fee for the event just to be seated at the table beside the Minister of Immigration to be able to have a 15-minute conversation with him because it was solving a business need that he had. So it takes a lot of listening to find out who those stakeholders are moving forward. And then, Jay, if you move to the next slide. And then the biggest stakeholders for most organizations are their employees. So you want to make sure that the employee morale is being built. How do you reinforce the activities that you're doing from a brand perspective into your broader audience of people who are working with you, especially right now when you're thinking about the big resign and the quiet quitting and everything that everybody's talking about inside your businesses, that being able to create that morale where people are excited to be working with you, that they feel connected to your organization is key for a lot of organizations right now. Habitat has been fantastic at being able to create these employee builds where you go as a development day and volunteer your time to build a house. TELUS, CIBC, TD are fantastic at their giving days where they'll have their teams go out to specific organizations and align themselves with different volunteer activities. And then just recently, the CIBC Run for the Cure, that has been an ongoing relationship that is directly driven from their employee morale. They identified that the majority of their employees were female. The employees fed up that breast cancer was a big concern of theirs, and they connected the two and created the relationship for the Run for the Cure, and it's been going on for probably about 20 years now. It's been a fantastic relationship. Next slide. So then seeing proof. This is the big challenge for a lot of organizations. Brands have to justify the ROI that they're getting from the investment with you. The sponsorship is messy for that. If they go to TV, they go to radio, there's metrics that get provided for engagement. And in sponsorship, it doesn't exist in the same way. This has been identified as a huge issue for brands within the Canadian sponsorship landscape study for a number of years. It's been number 1 or 2 for probably 14 to the 15 years that study has been running. So you have to actively look at spending some of your funds on research and showcasing proof. What's the next slide, Jay? Yeah, so it's making sure that what you said you were going to do, you delivered on. That's a basic one. It's going through the elements of your contract and making sure you built on it. But the report that you give out can't be a generic report. It's not the same one for everyone. And there are elements that you would carry forward for everyone, but you need to look at the specific pieces that you said you were going to deliver for that partner in order to justify the ROI. And then that leads into the next slide, Jay. Okay, and then the next one is the relationship with your decision maker. Your decision maker has to go back to their boss and they have to justify the spend that they made. So that they're being judged on their impact and how they're driving their business. So creating that partnership with the decision maker for you, and anything you can do to help them be better at their job, help them get promoted, help them showcase that they're doing well, is important. So I always recommend that it's getting to know and developing a relationship with the decision maker rather than it being transactional, because that's going to help you in the long run. Especially the best comment I heard about sponsorship, the sponsorship industry, was from the head of marketing for Staples recently. And he was talking about, he came across it and it was like a Smurf village. And it's all these people who know each other, but nobody outside knew that they existed. And you will see that a lot of people move around within the sponsorship industry and within the marketing industry. So building those relationships will carry forward when they move from RBC to TD to wherever else. That if you're a good partner, it will just continue to get recognized. So where do we go from here? So how do you break through new doors and into new markets? Jay, if you can go to the next stage. The 5 areas of focus that we have on it is building your audience, knowing your audience, creating objectives, identifying budget, tactics, and then the success piece. And the next, Jay. So how can you help sponsors reach the audience you have? I think you really need to know, some navel gazing sometimes to identify who is your audience. What are you doing to identify who they are, how you can showcase them, what are the different delineations within your audience? I know you get the big push, and it seems desirous to be able to say we reach everybody, but reaching everybody kind of whitewashes it, and it doesn't give the sponsors the understanding of what makes you different from the festival or event down the street. So being able to really define, here are the different categories, different demographics that you have. And there are a number of ways to get that, whether you're doing on-site research, leveraging your Google Analytics, leveraging your social media and the social media analytics. There are a few ways you can pull that. But knowing the niche that you play in will really help you focus your efforts and save you time to say, here are the partners that I should be pursuing. Here are the partners that are a good match. And it will also help you be much more successful in your sales process because you've gone through and had that identification ahead of time. Throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping that you'll get somebody to bounce back is always a challenge, and will be much more frustrating, the fact that you don't get the responses that you would like to have. And then objectives. It's really understanding what your partners are trying to achieve and how you can make that happen. Doing your pre-research before you go into a conversation is essential. You really need to know where they are, where they're headed. There's a couple different ways you can do that, looking them up online. I could showcase to anybody separately from this call how you can go into Facebook ads and see every single ad that brand is running, and it'll give you a good understanding of where they're spending their money already. But what you have to do beyond doing that research before you have the conversation is go in, have a series of questions that you're working with, and then shut up and listen. It becomes imperative, and we get caught in it where we're trying to do the sell. And we're trying to make the close right away, and we think we know what they want to be in, and we've thought about a great opportunity for them. And if it's off base, they're going to walk away right away. And I've been in pitches where people have gone in and they've gone, here are the 10 major benefits that we can offer you. And the one that the brand was interested in was number 10. So you went through 9 things that they were going, no, 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 no. And by the time you got to 10, they're like, well, this isn't going to be a fit for us. So you need to have that listening ahead of time so you can actually understand where they're coming from. And that is whether it's a new partner or even an existing partner. I recommend that you have a discovery call with your existing partners at least once a year, where you're revisiting what their marketing objectives are, how things changed. I was just on a call with an organization out of Las Vegas, massive arts organization running an event, and they were doing a pitch to Jaguar, and it really came flat. And when I was talking to them about the pitch, they were saying, we can get people in cars, we've got the right demographic, we're going to have people test driving your cars, and everything was about the experience of getting people in cars and feeling that, Jaguar drive, which is fantastic. The issue from the Jaguar side is supply chain has hit them hard. They can't sell anybody a car if they wanted to right now. Their whole driver right now was, we want to give them a high-end experience that is brand awareness and a brand affiliation, but not a driver to cars, because they didn't want to set up for disappointment because they couldn't deliver on that piece. The next slide, Jay. So budget it's always that tempting one. Everybody's afraid to ask. I always recommend that have the conversation, figure out where they're sitting discovery wise, where their marketing's going, talk about the things that you can bring to the table, but then ask, what have they got to spend? And quite often the people will say, we don't know, we're still building our budgets, but it's important to give them a range. Go, is this a $10,000 thought? Is this a $100,000 thought? And they'll start winnowing it down for you. Because you don't want to put a Mercedes package in front of them and then realize they've got a Honda budget. And even having that conversation with them will help you make sure that the package you're bringing back fits their needs. And next slide, Jay. And then tactics. It's what can you offer that other forms of advertising can't? So we know that sponsorship brings that connection to people, that it hits them when they're having fun, when they're actually enjoying themselves. Sponsorship done right can build that experience. So what can you do within your activities that can offer that? And next slide, Jay. So, back one. Or can you go back one, Jay, or are you stuck? Okay.
I'm stuck, buddy. Sorry.
That's okay. I'll speak to it. So you quickly would have saw the Planet Fitness and their sponsorship of the New York City New Year's Eve event. They've been doing it for a number of years. They have massive, massive brand awareness that they provide in that. Everybody gets Planet Fitness hats. They get Planet Fitness glasses. Oh, thanks, Jay. They've got the bangers, the whole bit. And realistically, it has little to do with the New Year's Eve party itself. But what's the number one resolution that everybody makes on New Year's Eve? Is to get fit, to lose weight. And Planet Fitness, by creating this and getting this level of exposure in New York and then through the broadcast, is that they're the first brand that's going to come to mind when everybody's making these decisions, whether it's 12 o'clock at night and they're a little drunk, but it still creates that brand affinity and brand awareness. So it's thinking about what that extension is beyond the event itself. And then next slide, Jay. And then vitamin water, this is from the Way Home Festival. Anybody who's been to a concert, festival, spent the full day outside or weekend outside in the heat, knows that there's not a lot of shade, there's not a lot of trees in some of these festival spaces. And the fact that they've created this experience where they've just got a mister. So people are walking through, getting misted here and cooling down, that they've created this affinity of vitamin water refreshes you. So it just adds to the experience of the event at the festival and then creates that brand affinity with the actual product being vitamin water. And next slide, Jay. So this was Reese's for Halloween 2020, but there's a lot of uses for technology. So it's how can you bring new technology into your space, or working with your partners to make it happen, that become surprise and delight experiences. So something new that is going on. So Reese's developed this where you rang the doorbell and it popped out your candy for Halloween. There's an organization out of Toronto here called Wonder Maker. If you've seen any of the work that they've done, it has been spectacular for creating this kind of technology engagement. They've been working with the likes of Mattel at the International Car Show, where they built a vending machine that responded to Twitter. So you send a tweet to the vending machine, and then the vending machine popped out a Hot Wheels car at the International Car Show. The engagement around that experience was incredible. The lineup for people just to wait for their tweet to go through was unbelievable. But it gained social following for Mattel. It created a lot of buzz for the organization, and it wasn't that hard to deliver once they actually physically had the machine there. The same organization has done some stuff with the likes of Hendrick's Gin, where they were launching a new cucumber gin. They set up in the Eaton Centre in Toronto a massive organ where all the keys have been replaced by cucumbers. And then they had somebody who was playing it. And then if you remember from the Olympics a few years ago, the Red Door experience, where you went into, they were running at a number of Canadian Tires and then at Cadillac Fairview locations where you could open this door, this red door, and a screen popped up, and there was an Olympian who was at the Olympics on the other side, and you could have a conversation back and forth with them. So it's these surprise and delight elements where you're bringing technology into your experience and allowing yourself to be, your organization to be open to that. The next slide. And then this is, La Ronde in Montreal and the connection they've done with Globo Shoes. This is one element that I think has been overlooked by many, many organizations. Your social media has value. And I find that too many people are like, okay, we'll send a tweet for you, or we'll do this activity on social media, and they throw it in as a giveaway. But it's really important to be able to build campaigns utilizing your social and knowing that brands will pay for that. Sponsorship is the original influencer market. So all these people who are running as an athlete or an influencer on YouTube and have got a following, they've got a trust that they've built with their following. You've already got that as an event. And even through COVID, the people who loved your event, they didn't stop loving your event because it wasn't running. You just needed to find ways to talk to them. And even finding ways where you're talking to your audience outside of when your event is happening. If you've got activities you can do throughout the year, you're going to gain that engagement with your audience, but also create conduits for your sponsors to be able to reach your audience, and which creates new revenue streams for you. So there are a number of ways that you can value your social engagement. There's a group out of Portland called Squad. He's got on his website where you can put in how many people you're going to reach, what that engagement would look like, and he'll, using his screen that he's developed, actually be able to price that out so you know what the equivalency would be on Facebook, would be on YouTube, would be on Google, so you can value what that is. So it also helps you gauge, is it a $10,000 engagement or a $500 engagement? But it's always important to know how much people would spend elsewhere, and that helps you figure out your budgeting too. Next slide, Jay. And then building success. Most organizations, most brand marketers, they're running really lean. They don't know your event the way you know your event. So you've got to help them create the story. What would that success look like? Being able to say, based on the objectives that you've got and the audience you want to reach, here's how we think that engagement could look. So I know we worked with ETAL Fest Montreal, which is a 500,000 person street festival. Especially through COVID, they were really challenged. How do they reach that audience, still run the event, and be able to engage with their partners? Because they knew their partners still wanted to reach those audiences. So we helped them frame some of the thinking around what they were doing, and especially their food partners and their wine partners. We were able to take an experience that they had done live in terms of cooking demos and create a whole series of video capsules where they were bringing the chefs, filming them, utilizing the different partners, and showcasing the brands within that. And it became a huge success. In fact, now that they're moved back to live, they're still continuing with that hybrid element because it's been really successful and something their partners have really enjoyed. So it's sometimes thinking outside the box, but it's being able to figure out where's your comfort level with having a brand engaged and what would that initiation look like. That's kind of my quick and dirty on where we come from in terms of building your sponsorship moving forward. Happy to engage with anybody after the call, but would really love to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. And Amos, you can poke at me from your experience, because I know you've lived all of this, and would love to hear what you're thinking.
That was great, Brad. Thanks so much for all that information. I have so many questions. So one question I do have, is sponsorship a 4-letter word now? Yes and no.
Certainly take Hockey Canada and everything that's going on with Hockey Canada right now. There's also a scenario that's going on in New Zealand and Australia around a major partner. So it's that morals and social community element is always a challenge. You need to make sure that you've got your organization and sort of your morals and obligations are all in order, and that you're not going to put a brand in the wrong position. But also you've got to work with your brands to make sure that you're comfortable with where they sit. So I'll talk about the situation in New Zealand and Australia first. There's a massive development company out of the UK, out of France, who has been trying to get a lot of business throughout New Zealand and Australia. And one of their avenues for making the brand well known was to take naming rights. So they are on the front of the New Zealand national team rugby shirts. They've sponsored a number of naming rights for Australian rugby team, Australian football teams. And the issue has come out now that their CEO is being reviewed for the fact that there are a number of bribery charges against him. So he's been trying to facilitate some business with government, and it has become a huge problem for them as an organization, but now becomes an issue for all these brands because they've taken it, put the brand's name on their shirt, and now they don't want to be affiliated with it. So that becomes a big thing about how you have to figure out how you're going to deal with those issues. And Hockey Canada, everybody's fairly familiar with what's going on. That they're leveraging, the brands are leveraging their strength through money to be able to make changes at the organization. But it becomes a massive headache because all the marketing goals they wanted to achieve with the affiliation with Hockey Canada have now gone out the window. It becomes a PR game for them to be able to say, we can't be affiliated with this, so we're pulling our money back. Depending on how the contracts are, the money may not be available for them to reinvest elsewhere yet. So there are elements where it becomes a 4-letter word, but it's still an important part of marketing. It's 25% of where people are investing their marketing dollars. So it's being able to say, you're a trusted partner, you know what you're doing, you're able to showcase it. If you've got information you can share about what other partners have been able to do with you, and your history of running your organization, that's just going to showcase you as a good investment and something that people want to choose.
And is there another word you can use instead of sponsorship? Like, have you ever come across that you're approaching somebody and, hesitant to use that, to use the format of sponsor? I don't know. I'm just asking that if there's a different way to frame it.
And sometimes it comes out in the discovery calls.
Okay.
So sometimes people are like, we don't sponsor anything. And then as you're having a conversation with them, it's like, well, how do you reach your audience? And what would be of value to you to be able to reach more people in that space? So Cannondale Bikes, we've done work with them over the last number of years, and they don't sponsor any events, is what they continuously tell us. But they still want to reach that end consumer. And the reason why they don't sponsor any events is they haven't been able to track, if I sponsor this cycling event, I can figure out that the different retailers that we're associated with are seeing an upswing in sales. So then it was, how do we partner with the retailers to be able to bring that ROI back so that they could actually do that follow through, that a $10,000 investment at one ride would equal 3 or 4 sales. So it's being able to track those elements and create the flow through. So sometimes it's stepping back from calling it sponsorship and just saying, what are your marketing objectives and how are you achieving that now? And then coming back and saying, okay, well, here's how we can build out a plan for you.
So, you talked about discovery questions. I'm assuming that a lot of these events are a little bit smaller than, Jaguar and the people who are on this call. What kind of questions, like if you're approaching somebody new, how do you discover who that person is, and what would the discovery conversation be, and how do you find the decision maker?
So that's the biggest challenge is where Sponsor Circle got initiated. We struggled, I struggled as somebody who'd been in the industry for a long time, but how do I find the right people to talk to? And we ended up building a platform where, finding who's in the space, who's tracking, who's been investing in different activities, and building that roster. And we built machine learning into it, that you can come to us. The more we learn about your search patterns in your organization, we're able to start our recommender engine and feed different potential brands for you to consider looking at. So it helps you shape that conversation and the right contacts to start those conversations with. So we can be one conduit, but it's also it's starting with knowing what your equity is, what you have to offer, will help you shape the different verticals that you would look at pursuing. So even if you're a local festival, you've got, real estate agents, you've got, the local Sun Life person. It's understanding who's in the space and being able to understand their business. So once you figure it out, I might be a good event for X person, then sitting down, having an open conversation with them about what are their marketing objectives? Why have they been investing in bus shelters here? And saying, okay, well, here's how we might be able to do the same activity, or probably an augmented activity with them. And it's just having an open dialogue about what they're investing in, what their budgets are, what their business objectives are. If you look at, auto as a perfect example, and I know it's getting a little big sometimes, but the whole brand awareness piece is being driven by for the most part, dealer associations or the national brand. But the local dealer wants people to come in and come in for service. So that can be an angle for how you would get somebody engaged. So it's really that listening piece that becomes important.
So does anybody have any questions? I mean, I have a lot more here, but we'd like to hear from you and what your pain points are. How can Brad help you getting new sponsors or engaging the sponsors you already have in a new way?
Hey, Brad, it's Seamus talking again. Nice to see you again.
Likewise.
My question is around the gold, silver, bronze. I can appreciate that it's the old style of doing things, but don't you think there needs to be some level of tiering or benefits thresholds to understand where you are and where your sponsor is in life? I believe sponsors are a lot egotistical. Nobody wants to be the bronze sponsor. So finding that healthy balance of knowing, you're not the top dog, but you do play a role in what are the benefits and rights. And so I'd like to maybe get your feedback on what you think about tiering and how you're going about allocating those.
Yeah, I mean, 100% that you've got to have a menu. So you can't go in blank when you're having the conversation with them. So you've got the roster of here are all the benefits that we can offer as an organization, and then you start piecemealing those together for the needs of the partner through those conversations. But then creating those tiers. So the silver level sponsor for the restaurant down the road may not be the same as the silver level sponsor benefits for someone else. So that's where I usually approach it from. It's a monetary investment. So that if you come in at $25,000, you're going to be at this threshold in terms of where you'd be on a sponsored placard or on the back of a t-shirt or on the website. But the benefits may be different because they'll be tailored to the different organizations. Now, that being said, there are some sponsors that I will talk to who they do love the gold, silver, bronze. So you kind of have to have that balance. But going in first and having your package look like everybody else's package is quite often going to get you moved to the garbage file as opposed to being looked at. Oh, you're on mute, Debbie.
Sorry about that. Is anybody else, any kind of questions, any concerns, any new information or old information that you want to get Brad's expertise on?
I'm going to jump in and ask a question.
Sure.
As long as I'm not cutting someone else off. I was really interested in what you said about the discovery call, but also I'm just wondering your thoughts on keeping, I guess you've talked a lot about building relationships with your contact person, and I think that's a great point. I'm just wondering about your thoughts around keeping in touch, and a lot of the festivals and events that happen are sort of once a year, it's always the first Monday in August, or it's always, summertime or whatever. And how important is keeping that going throughout the year? So, calls or some sort of contact that, happens maybe throughout the year that's not necessarily tied to an ask, about around monetary donation or whatever, but even just a call to say, hey, we're getting ready for next year's festival. We're working on some new ideas. What are your thoughts about this? Like, have you seen that sort of result in better relationships and better sort of results in the end?
That's 100% important. Is starting, I think there's two levels of conversation there. One is having ongoing communication throughout your engagement. So I've seen too many partners do this where they've done the sales process, they've got the contract sold, and then there's no conversation till a week before the event. And then the sponsor comes in, they have a flat-footed engagement, or sometimes you end up with some conflict between what they want to do and what you're willing to offer. And that last-minute piece frustrates everybody. So you've got to have ongoing communication, even if it's just a weekly, bi-weekly touch base to see where they're at, project managing some of the elements that they've got for deliverables and what you've got to bring to the table for your event. So that's the first piece. But certainly that ongoing conversation throughout the year. So you've got your post-event conversation that you're going to have anyways. But then it's regular touch points where you can you see something, whether it's through LinkedIn or something you think connects with them well, and being able to bring that up. There's a couple people I know who do it really well, where they'll see an article and they'll forward it, or they'll see a new idea and they'll forward it on to them. So they're creating that relationship, or even just going and having a coffee with somebody on a occasional basis. But you want to be top of mind, and particularly when you understand their budget flow. For a lot of events, they happen in the summer, but 40% of budget decisions are made in October, November. So you need to be having that relationship conversation August, September, October, November to make sure that you're planned in their budget, as opposed to being an afterthought when you're trying to squeeze it back in March and they hadn't remembered you.
Catherine, go ahead.
Thank you, Brad, for the presentation. I'm from a small town, so we're really far from Jaguar and Tide and all of those. But my question is more towards, you mentioned ROI. How do we provide measurement? It's always, for me, it's hard to wrap my head around it. Is it numbers? Is it, I really like your example with multiculturalism, well, not necessarily, but newcomers. It's like, I'm just having a hard time. How do you measure or, bring that communicate that to the sponsor?
We were going to promote this later, but I'll drop it now. So I'm running a session next week, which you're welcome to join in on with Judy Haber from Performance Sponsorship Group, talking about municipal sponsorship and naming rights. But I love Judy's consistent approach. Is that small town events and activities? There's very specific value there that you can't get in a large city. So it's being able to identify, who are the big employers, who's trying to do things within the community to showcase what they're doing. And last session I ran with Judy last year, she was talking through COVID, and there was a lot of employers who were just trying to say, one, they're a good community contributor, but then they were also dying for staff. So it was, how do they build that? So being able to know who's in your space, and then as you're having those discovery conversations, the ROI for them may not be physically, we want 20,000 people at your event. It may be, we need to hire 100 people. And if you can help them drive that, it becomes harder for you to track it. But when you're having those conversations with your partner, if you've identified that as a need up front, then you can, after the fact, say, well, did we actually help you here? And you can showcase that.
Okay.
And I find quite often in smaller communities, your relationship to council can help, because they'll hear different things from different companies and their specific needs. So if you've got relationships with councillors, some of that can bubble down to you.
Okay. Thank you.
I remember Judy also saying, look at who's booming in your community as far as companies and, renovation and building. And those are construction companies. Those are some that you might not consider, but they're there. I mean, the whole, dog world, the whole animal world, there could be something there. That's something I wanted to ask you, Brad. I know we've only got a couple more minutes, but adding an element into your event that would invite a sponsor to come in, is that something?
There's definitely elements of that. I think you need to have that balance of what would it cost you to create that piece, and whether it fits within the look and feel of your event. But if it makes sense, and that you can do it for an affordable element, whether you had a sponsor or not,
Right.
And then bring in the sponsors. So right now, there's a couple big sponsorships that are happening with baseball teams in the States, and one of them was with Purina and being able to bring dogs to the stadium. And it's happening in a number of places, but definitely the one stadium has done it really, really well. It doesn't really cost them much more to allow the dogs to come to a game. There's some cleanup elements and some other pieces they need to set up, but it changes the interaction with their fans, and then brings in a partner that they would never been able to have there before.
That reminds me, we will wrap up in just a quick minute, but here in Kitchener, Waterloo, Oktoberfest a couple of years, they have horses pulling a big Budweiser wagon, but they had volunteers dressed up as prisoners in black and white stripes with a can that they could pick up all the horse leavings. But that was a sponsored, I think it was a Big Boy who always has, it's a furniture company. So they did that. It's just interesting to see how what you have within your event, how it can get creative and add some elements. And the Kingston Sheepdog Trials started to bring in all different kinds of entertainment, not just from herding sheep, dogs competing about herding sheep, but they brought elements in for the general population that they could bring their dogs, and dogs and dog lovers days. So, and there was a whole bunch of sponsorship opportunities with it. So I think it's just as looking at your event and seeing what you can add.
and what
Yeah.
your events person is willing to take on as you get
Yes,
creative.
that's true. Yeah, finding people to help you with that too. That's that's always a challenge. Well, it's 2 minutes to. Nora, do you have any last words before I sign off? And
Yeah, thank you, Brad, for the presentation, and thanks, Debbie, for facilitating this morning. I just want to remind everybody that we do have a second festivals and events webinar happening in about a month's time on Thursday, November 17th. The details are there on your screen. You can register the same way that you registered for this one, just right directly through our GMIST site. And we have speaker Louise Jackson joining us talking about, great segue, Debbie. You said finding people to help you.
Yep.
Our next session is about the element of volunteers. So hopefully you can join us next time. And we really appreciate you being with us this morning.
And thank you, everyone. With just a quick reminder that we will have a survey sent out to you after this to see how there's to get your feedback on this session. We will get Brad's session to Nora so that she can get that out to you for next week. And Brad, some people have been asking if they can get the deck. Are you okay with that being shared or
Yeah,
not?
that's totally fine.
That's
Happy
fine?
to share.
Okay, so Nora, you have that. And if you, for anybody who wants it, can reach out to Nora to get it. Thank you so much. We will see you in November. I really appreciate the time. And Brad, thank you so much. And Nora, thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.